early morning. I was watching my 2-year-old, and she was playing in the other room, and I received a phone call from my brother telling me to quick turn on the news. And when I turned on the news, I saw the first tower smoking, and from that moment on, it was chaos in my house. My phone ringing from other officers that I work with. I knew probably immediately that I would be rushing into work, so I made arrangements for someone to come watch my kid, and got my wife on the phone, and my wife was crying, and all their work was getting ready to close, and she was getting ready to come home, and told her to get home as fast as she humanly could possibly get there. Then my work Nextel went off, and it was Chief Land. Obviously, knowing that I've been paying attention to the news and watching everything that was going on, he informed me that he was assembling a team of officers to head north to the city.
I woke up in the morning, of course. I heard about it on the news. I was really shocked of everything that I seen. I really couldn't believe it at first. Came to work. We were here. I was at work probably about a half hour. We got tuned out to meet up at the Deptford Mall complex for a task force assignment. They were going to send everybody up to New York, not only us, but people from surrounding counties and so on and so forth. So we got up to New York. They stayed just at the Meadowlands, a giant stadium parking lot. All right, there was easily probably about 300 pieces of apparatus. The ambulance and fire there.
You could see numerous vehicles pouring out of the city. Everybody was heading south on the turnpike, and we were heading north. And you could just see the plume of smoke. Our first assignment, we stopped a New Jersey State Police officer who had the area blocked off. He had the turnpike blocked off at the entrance, probably to Liberty State Park. That's where our first assignment was.
My first memory of September 11th was actually the moment we arrived at Liberty State Park in Jersey City, and just seeing they're not there anymore, and seeing the smoke, and it's just, after seeing the Twin Towers and that skyline for so many years, it's something that everybody was familiar with. Everybody always looked to see when they went to New York City, and they weren't there. And it was just the shock of the reality at that point that, you've heard they were gone, you saw them go down on television, and then actually being there and saying, the shock at, this is what's happening, this is what, that was my first impression.
It's almost like the military. They rush you to hurry up and wait to do anything. So when we arrived in the Chelsea Piers, we were sitting there, we were so antsy. Everybody wanted to get down to ground zero and help. And once we got down to ground zero, it was total disbelief and shock. You just sit there and the emotions were out of control.
Things that I seen, I don't even think I could put into words. It was just like really, really emotional. I mean, I really can't touch on it. It was really, really bad. It really was.
That's one thing, the smell, pretty bad. You could, particles in the air, get you in your throat, you were coughing. You could see, but visibility was very poor. Smoke, debris particles flying in the air, guys all over the place trying to just do some of everything. The destruction, the chaos, you just could not imagine. Like, the television didn't do it any justice. You get down to ground zero and you just sat and looked, saying, just could not believe it, could not believe it.
We actually were about 2 blocks away, and by then it was dark. And I remember as we got out of our patrol car, it was kind of like Christmas Eve in a snowstorm in the city. There was nobody, there was just complete silence. We were about 2 blocks away, and the dust and the paper and everything, the smell, and as you stepped out, you stepped into everything was coated with probably an inch or two of this dust that basically was the remains of the tower and everything around it. And it was almost eerie. It was like the serenity of the surroundings. You've never thought you'd hear a silent day in New York City, and that's what I experienced then. And just walking around as we walked up to actual Ground Zero, we turned the corner, and the first thing you saw were the remains of the North Tower and spotlights shining from behind it. And that was just, it's something that I'll never forget.
I can only describe it as the silence of like an unbelievable snowstorm. There was at least 1 inch to 2 inches of gray soot everywhere that you could possibly see. Even within our vehicle, we had to wear a respiratory mask. There were, well, probably more disturbing than anything else, there were officers, before we could even get into the Trade Center area, there were officers on posts that were assigned security posts. Certain corners where banks were, things like that, stores. And these officers were sitting there, just like they had been sitting there for days. They were covered with like 1 inch of soot on their shoulders, on their hats. At that point in time, we had water, and we were trying to supply as many of the New York City officers water or refreshments as anything to make their jobs a little more comfortable. We parked about 2 blocks away, and Sergeant Sawyer, Corporal Brucker, Lieutenant Neely, and myself exited the vehicle that I was in. We began to walk up on foot, and the silence was just unbelievable, more eerie than anything else. And you'd think that all of that, I mean, you could hear diesel construction vehicles and stuff like that running in the background, but no one was talking. We walked up, and the closer we got, there's no TV camera or anything that could describe the amount of destruction. What the TV cameras always focused on was just the Trade Center Plaza, but they never showed that 4 blocks away there were buildings that didn't have windows in, or were on fire, or where police officers and emergency personnel had wrote with their finger, checked and negative for anyone remaining within the building. It was getting more eerie as we walked closer, and the closer we got, the more obstacles there were. Personal belongings and artifacts laying in the street. What bothered me the most was walking by at least 2 or 3 dozen police vehicles where you could still see that the vehicles were set up, the officer's ready bag and equipment that, I know I've set my patrol car up like that in the past. Police cars that appeared to be picked up and thrown a huge distance. As we got closer into the Ground Zero area, the damage was just unbelievable. When it started getting dark, we were assigned, we went up there to be used in any capacity which they wanted us to be. And we were assigned a perimeter detail on the, I want to say, northwest point, just keeping all personnel from passing our location. We were set up on a traffic post, was about 4 blocks, and all of our officers, we got out and we were just doing security, keeping people from going in, moving people on, kind of directing traffic and stuff like that. We did this for approximately 2 hours. Then we went further into a secondary gathering point near an Acme at the foot of another bridge. At this point, we were supplied masks and told to basically relax, try to get some sleep if we could, that the emergency personnel was still at the pit, which was Ground Zero, starting the cleaning and recovery. And we were told to relax because come daytime, we would be needed.
On the 12th, we started actually pulling debris off the site, and just, I would say probably maybe 75 yards from the actual incident site there, they had already had a triage set up with doctors and nurses and everybody helping out. And I think for me, just looking you know, to the right and left of me and seeing, you know, a construction worker to my right, you know, New York, I got an actor to my left, or a police officer in front of me, or firemen to the next side of me, just EMS. For me, I think that was more important, something that I learned as a person more from going up there than anything else. Just seeing how much everybody came together and helped out, and people of all walks of life, not just law enforcement or firemen or whatever. At that point, everybody felt the urgency to help out and come together.
Since the day I pinned the badge on my chest, my obligation was for the safety and protection of others. This was just an extension of that from the town, from the residents of Mantua.
God bless the USA.
The people were, it almost looked like the marathon was going on in New York. People on both sides of the streets cheering us in, thanking you for coming in and helping them. And it's a shame it took something like this for everybody to come together with something on that September 11th. It's something that should have happened every day, not just a one-day thing. That should be an everyday thing, that people should be able to get along with each other and not wait for something tragic and horrific, for something like that to happen, for everyone to come together. And I think it's something that really needs to go more than just one day.
I'm so proud of these guys. I can't tell you, after 30 years of being on the job, 30 years working in the busiest fire department per capita in the state of New Jersey, in Camden, I know what it's all about. When everybody runs out of buildings, we're running in buildings, or we're protecting lives, or we're giving immediate medical services. People don't realize, and it's a sad thing that this horrific thing had to happen in order for the American public to say, oh my God, look what those guys do for a living. We lost 343 firefighters in the city of New York. We lost 64 police officers. I don't know how many EMS, emergency service workers.
A lot of people like to say out of sight, out of mind, you know, out of sight, out of mind. Like if you don't see it, you know, they think that it's not going to happen, but September 11th opened everybody's eyes to say that, yeah, it could happen close to home. And for us to only go a couple hundred miles down the turnpike, you know, that could have been in our backyard. That could have been in Philadelphia.
I think everybody is in more of a cautious state after September 11th. Once again, simply because the unimaginable can become the imaginable. And I don't think anybody ever thought that the World Trade Centers and the Pentagon would ever be toppled like that, but they've shown that evil minds can accomplish those feats, and that's something that we in law enforcement have to, you know, concentrate on every day.
The image that we shouldn't take our time for granted, and in a matter of a second, you know, responding to any type of emergency, something you know, catastrophic could happen. That even though this is the United States, that we're not safe from people damaging our beliefs and values, and something that our guard is always up, but it needs to be up in even a more vigilant manner now, just due to the fact that protecting the safety and the well-being of everyone, including myself first. Just need to be more aware and stop taking everything just for granted.
I think we're getting a lot of support. People are starting to understand that we need to, you know, be at a heightened level of awareness, and I think that you know, with continued support, I think as long as everybody keeps their eye open and pays attention to the little things, pays attention to detail, that you know, we'll be able to, you know, spot any further attacks or something like that coming up.
There's not one firefighter, not one police officer, not one EMS worker that went into the World Trade Centers that day that ever, in their wildest imagination, figured that building would collapse on them. They were going in there, you know, not paying no mind to that. They were doing their job that day. Their job is to save life and property. That's what it's all about.
It was a mad rush to get up there and to try to help out. When we finally had gotten to, we finally got to an area up there, and they were giving us assignments, And at that point in time, one of the lieutenants, or I don't know what rank he was, had looked over the crowd and pretty much said, you know, we've lost, our department has lost a number of, a great number of people today, and we're just thankful that, that you guys came up to help. And at that point, I kind of felt, that realism kind of hit me, and I kind of thought back for a minute, back to my wife, and everybody, thinking about everybody else, your friends, family, and like you said, we're lucky. We were able to go up to help and come home. It's just unfortunate that the officers and firemen up there weren't able to do the same thing.
I know I speak for all the guys in the profession now, and that it changed our lives tremendously. That to know that your life, with what we take for granted, to know that we may not come home, but nobody ever thinks about that kind of stuff. But my life was changed completely to tell my brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews that I love them, even though that I see them. It's just that point that I may not. So I want to make sure that they know how I feel about them, just in case.
It made me realize how important the people are in my life, how close they really are to me. It really has. So, I can only imagine how the people feel that have lost loved ones.
Getting back, seeing my family, my wife, I missed my dog too. And just, it makes you appreciate the things that you take for granted more so. As much as, like I said, just coming home every day, you don't appreciate just exactly what you have. And then seeing how so many people had lost so much, it makes you appreciate just what you do have.
The people that were in each other's lives last year, how they're not in each other's lives this year. You look at the faces on TV and you see how sad they are and how they're grieving for their families and how they can never get that back. There's something that you're just never going to get back again, and it's an emptiness. It's a feeling of just like loneliness. But then you think about how America's come together through this and how we've all bonded and really just become like one nation under God, and how just it's a love for your country and it's a love for your fellow man. It's really changed how I think we feel as Americans towards one another.
September 11th, 2001, terrorists hijacked 4 civilian aircraft, crashing into the World Trade Center in New York City, a third into the Pentagon outside of Washington, D.C., and a fourth into the countryside of Pennsylvania. Whereas thousands of innocent people, including Americans of every heritage and visitors to our shores, were killed and injured as a result of these wicked and reprehensible attacks, including the passengers and crews of the aircraft, workers in the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, bystanders, tourists, and rescue workers. Whereas these attacks were the deadliest ever launched against the United States, and by targeting symbols of American strength and success, were clearly intended to intimidate our nation and weaken its resolve. Now therefore be it resolved by the Township of Mantua that we extend our deepest condolences to the victims of these heinous and ungodly actions, as well as to their families and friends. And be it further resolved that we commend the heroic actions of the passengers and crews of the aircraft, the rescue workers, the volunteers, the officials, and so many of the victims themselves who responded to these tragic events with courage, compassion, determination. And be it further resolved that we do condemn and denounce the terrorists who planned and executed this devastation, as well as their cowardly sponsors and accomplices. And be it further resolved that we thank those leaders and individuals who have expressed solidarity with the United States in the aftermath of these attacks. And be it further resolved that we support our President, his Cabinet, our armed forces, our federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, and Congress in their efforts to bring justice to the perpetrators of these attacks. And be it further resolved that we stand ready, Governor McGreevey and his administration, to share whatever resources we have that might be needed for the ongoing efforts, as well as with any agencies charged with the investigation of this murder and the apprehension of the responsible parties. And be it further resolved that Mantua Township does hereby designate September 11th, 2002 as Always Remember Day, in commemoration of the innocent victims and the heroes of the terrorist attack on the United States, which took place on September 11, 2001. And be it further resolved that all persons within this municipality are urged to honor these victims by appropriate displays of our flag and of the red, white, and blue ribbons. This resolution duly adopted by the Township Committee on a regular meeting held August 27, 2002.
People need need the Lord. People need the Lord. At the end of broken dreams, He's the open door. People need the Lord. People need the Lord.
We had to contact the FBI special agent, Rich Marks, and through him and a number of phone calls, we end up going through Mayor Bloomberg's, his emergency operations management, and eventually we were able to make arrangements to go up to acquire the piece of steel. So we sent our Public Works Department up to pick the steel up. There was a number of requirements to be able to pick the steel up, though. You would never in a million years think that just a mangled piece of steel in a monument would mean anything to anybody. It represents all the victims of that day, over 3,000 people who were killed. This little piece of steel that's mangled up about 4 or 5 feet tall on top of a monument. You know, it has great significance. One of our residents, John Rodak, his wife Joyce, and his daughters Chelsea and Devin, you know, they're left without a father. John tragically passed in the September 11th tragedies. And we as a community felt that, you know, John was deserving of a memorial. John was a dedicated father. He was a dedicated softball coach. He never missed a practice. He was involved with soccer. John was involved with his community. And we feel it only fitting that we have a memorial for John.
At this time, I'd like to read